Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, my name is Jennifer and I grew up in rural Kentucky on 150 acres of land. Our home was literally parked in the middle of the woods and it was breathtakingly beautiful. I have so many wonderful charmed memories of my childhood, of fishing with my dad and joining him on the hunt, and also rescuing little orphaned animals in the woods, and believe me, there were many. I was homeschooled by my mother, so the only friend I had was Tammy, my sister, and also the children that I met through the church who would come and play at our home frequently. When I was 8, I had a little boyfriend called Tommy, who said I was the only girl that he liked because I was not obsessed with dolls like other girls were. I pretended in front of him to hate dolls so that he would like me, but when his back was turned, I always played with the dolls, unbeknown to him. One day he came to play at my home and we wandered into the woods without my mother knowing. She always told me never to go into those woods alone. Before long we had a big fight. Although it was such a long time ago, I have no recollection of what we were fighting about. Tommy pushed me over and I literally went rolling down this stony elevation of land and ended up grazing my knee badly. I remember sitting there howling while Tommy made his way back to the cabin, leaving me all on my own. My knee was hurting and burning. It was bruised and bleeding, and I started hobbling along the path. The next thing I knew was that I was being lifted up by this big creature that had very, very hairy arms. I remember being lifted at a much higher elevation off the ground than when my dad and mum picked me up, because this creature was enormous. I really thought at first that it was a man dressed up as a monkey, and I started to giggle because I thought it was hilariously funny. I remember even tugging the hair on the creature's face. The creature didn't seem to mind and put me down near the cabin, and my mother saw me hobbling around as she opened the door. When I told her that little Tommy had pushed me down, my mother was angry with him, but naturally he denied it. Neither of us mentioned we had been in the woods because we knew we would be in ever so much trouble. I remember asking my mum about the man in the monkey costume and who he was, and she told me that my fall was making me see things. I remember another time as a little girl dressing up in my mother's high heels and pretending to be a teacher with my miniature blackboard outside the cabin. As I was playing teacher, as we called the game, I remember these brown eyes watching me curiously behind a tree. I suddenly saw this little creature of no more than 2.5 feet, covered in hair, with long arms like a monkey. When I saw him, he was standing upright like a human would and looked like a miniature version of the monkey man I had encountered the time Tommy pushed me over. The creature was startled because I'd seen him, and he leapt up on a branch like a monkey and scuttled up to the treetops. I remember telling my mother about the monkey in the tree, but she never believed me until one day she was washing the dishes at the kitchen sink and saw the larger creature I had encountered when I was younger. She saw the creature look at her and just walked in the woods with such grace, not looking back once. I remember she got on the phone to tell my dad that she had seen a Bigfoot in the woods and that the creature was indeed real. When my dad came home, they wandered out in the woods to look for signs of the creature, but only found a very degraded footprint, which was exceptionally large, at about 18 inches to be precise. My mother was curious about what she had seen, but my dad was concerned and told us that none of us were allowed in the woods unless he accompanied us, because it would be dangerous. One day when I was about 15 years old, my sister and I were swimming at the creek, and as I was in the water, I felt two hairy hands pulling me under and then releasing me. I was so terrified I tried to run out of the water, but it happened all over again. Then it happened to my sister Tammy. She started to scream and ran out of the water hastily. At that moment I thought I saw a little rock moving in the water, but it was the cone-shaped head of a Bigfoot coming up for air. With his hair so wet, he almost looked like an otter. I watched the cone head disappear under the water again, and I ran out before he ducked me under the water again. I think he was playing games with us and didn't mean us any harm. But as far as games go, being ducked under the water is not fun. It can be incredibly scary. I guess the creature must have been a juvenile, but I only got a brief look of the head, so it was hard to tell. One thing I do know from that experience is that Bigfoot can swim and is extremely good at it. The final time I had a Bigfoot encounter at our home was when my father came back from a squirrel hunt, and he had half a dozen squirrels strung together that he left on the front porch to appease my mother. You see, my mother hated him squirrel hunting because she liked the creatures and she hated Dad killing them. That night I heard a noise on the patio because I was a light sleeper, and so I tiptoed to the window that overlooked the patio area to see what was going on. I saw the silhouette of the Sasquatch in the moonlight, stealing all of my father's squirrels. I knew my mother would be pleased to see them gone. I could not get a close view of the Bigfoot apart from his distinctive cone head, long arms and huge body. He literally took him seconds to steal the squirrels, which he slung over his shoulder, and he scurried away very quietly, almost gliding along the grass. I watched it scale a 6-foot fence as if it was nothing and vanish into the woods. Needless to say, my dad is convinced my mother threw away his squirrels, and so he has lost interest in squirrel hunting because he believes my mum disposes of his offerings. I even heard him tell a friend once that there was no use hunting if you're married to a softie that thinks standing on an ant is murderous. His friends laughed and said, "Well, at least your wife can cook. Anything my wife makes turns to charcoal and dust because she burns everything." So there you are, that is my Bigfoot story. I believe the one near us means us no harm. I have been lucky to have had a few sightings over the years, but I think they stay out of our way, but I believe they are always watching us, and they certainly do have a sense of humour. I once went to a monkey sanctuary with my dad, and we did not see a single monkey until the food came out. Then suddenly, from nowhere, there were hundreds of monkeys all around us, grabbing food. You see, they'd been watching us all along. I think Bigfoot knows a lot about humans, and I think he watches us all the time. And he's brilliant at camouflaging himself so well that even when he's in plain sight, we simply don't see him. We don't see him at all. Hope you enjoyed my story. I really loved that story. Thank you so very much. Dear Sarah, I live in the Appalachian Mountains and I have a beautiful homestead here. I live a typical rural life, looking after my family, growing vegetables and making homemade bread. I really enjoy my lifestyle here, and I've heard over the years about people encountering strange creatures like Sasquatch, but I've never had an experience of seeing one myself until June of 2008. Before I begin, I'd like to say that my two boys were very young at the time. Wayne was only 5 and Donovan was 6. I was planning a birthday bash for Donovan's 7th birthday. I was planning to invite loads of friends from our church family, including any new arrivals or attendees at the church, and of course Donovan's and Wayne's circle of their own personal friends. We planned to have a very nice big gathering. We are very friendly out here in the Appalachian Mountains. Maybe it's got a lot to do with the lovely fresh air. And when we have a party, everyone we know is always invited. I was going to prepare a pig on the spit with tons of salads, plenty of cakes and sweets for the kids, and all in all it was going to be a fabulous day. I was about to send out the invitations to everyone when Donovan approached me and said that he wanted his party to be a dress-up. Everyone must dress up as an animal, he said excitedly. I thought about it and then finally agreed. It would mean I'd have to get out the sewing machine, of course, and make lots of outfits for my kids. But what the heck, I thought. It could be quite fun. I tell you what, I said, we'll even get the adults to dress up. Won't that be nice? Donovan was jumping up and down and with excitement. Yeah, he laughed. So, sweetheart, I asked him, do you want to be a bumblebee? We can make you a lovely bumblebee costume. You'll love it. I know exactly where to get the stuff from. I don't want to be a bumblebee. I'm going to be Monkey Man. Monkey Man, I asked him. Oh, you mean Bigfoot. You want to be a Bigfoot. Monkey Man, said Donovan. He drew me a picture of a black hairy monkey man and told me that that is what he wanted to be. I sent out all the invitations telling people to come as any animal they chose, whether it was mythical, like a unicorn or a mermaid or a Bigfoot, and the list went on. All the children who were to come to the party were to have animal costumes made for their party. And everyone was so excited, especially as there was going to be 3 prizes for the very best costumes. I do not know how the adults felt about dressing up as an animal, but frankly I didn't care. It's going to be fun. Why not, I thought. We could do with bringing out the child in ourselves from time to time. I came back from town with all the material that I was going to need for Donovan's monkey costume and Wayne his unicorn outfit. Donovan was not happy with the material I had purchased. It's not black, he said, looking at the material in disgust. And it's not like real fur, Mummy. Seeing his disappointment, we went back into town the following day to get Donovan the material he wanted for his costume. But he wasn't too pleased with what was available, and I explained to him that the shop did not have black fur-like material. They only had dark brown, so we'd have to make do. I'm sure the Monkey Man may come in many colours, I told him. He did not look convinced that Monkey Man could be anything but black. He went on to continually tell me that Monkey Man was definitely black. I got to work making the costumes, and Donovan decided that he'd have to settle for the brown fur material after all. I hasten to add that no red flags were blowing in my mind as Donovan instructed me on how he wanted his costume to look. I assumed he'd been watching those Bigfoot programs you see on television, so I wasn't duly concerned. When Donovan got his first fitting in the monkey outfit, he would not stop examining himself in the mirror. He studied himself very carefully and very critically, and I watched him walking around the living room, moving his legs in a very odd and peculiar way. Then he would jump up on all fours and then get up on 2 feet, and then he started to make a strange chattering sound, and then he even made some weird grunting noises. I laughed out loud. He was funny to watch. Maybe he fancied himself as an actor or a comedian, and he was convincing. I was impressed. The day of the birthday arrived. I had made Donovan a huge Bigfoot cake with black icing made to look like the thick hair. It was an ugly, hideous, monster-like cake, but Donovan loved it, and that's all that mattered. After all, it was his birthday. I prepared the feast, including making burgers for the kids, and soon everyone started to arrive. Some of the mothers in these neck of the woods really know how to sew, because I kid you not, some of those costumes were works of art. I could not tell which child was which because they were all wearing full-body costumes with holes in the eyes to see through. I truly do not know one child from the other, but it didn't matter. There were some adults who did make an effort with their costumes, but very few. One man hired a dragon suit from a dress-up shop, while another one was a kangaroo and another a grizzly bear. As for the mothers, most of them didn't bother to dress up at all, which was pretty disappointing. Having said that, I was also not making much of an effort myself. I was wearing a pair of big bunny ears on my head and a white fluffy tail attached to the derriere of my pink skirt. The party was so much fun. The children were making a huge amount of noise, jumping boisterously up on the bouncy castle I'd hired. Later on we served lunch, and the pig on the spit was a huge success among the adults, but the children loved the burgers and the hot dogs. As the children were watching the clown I'd hired, who had everyone's attention, even the adults, because he had placed his head in a bowl of banana cream pie, and the children and the adults were throwing the rest of the pudding at the man and having so much fun. It was then in the distance I saw a man standing behind a tree dressed in a Bigfoot outfit. I wondered if he was a new member of our church, because he seemed very out of it and elusive and was keeping himself to himself. And when he saw me looking at him, he quickly tucked himself behind the branches of the tree. I know what it's like to feel painfully shy, so I felt a smouldering sense of empathy for the poor man. When I was younger, to avoid socialization, I had also hidden behind trees and hedges to avoid talking to people. It had been one of my best party tricks. The party went on to quite late in the day because the parents talked for ages amongst each other. Then it was the prize giving, and I looked around for the man with the Bigfoot outfit, but he was nowhere to be seen. So I presented the fancy dress prizes to Piglet, Eeyore, and Winnie the Pooh, all who wore costumes that their mothers had made to absolute perfection. I asked around, who was the young man from church in the Bigfoot outfit? It was a brilliant costume, so realistic, I said, just how I would imagine a Bigfoot to look, only way too small for a real Bigfoot. Everyone looked at me as if I was talking a foreign language. Nobody was wearing a Bigfoot costume. Ray was wearing that hairy bear suit, if that's what you mean, but there was no one wearing a Bigfoot costume. My heart started racing, not from fear, but from the realization that what I had seen behind the tree may well and truly have been the real deal himself, Bigfoot. There had definitely been something about that creature, even though he was small, I thought. But then you do get juveniles. Maybe he was a youngster who was just curious about the noises that were coming from my home. I then thought suddenly about my son's strange behavior recently, where he had mimicked what he called Monkey Man. He had also wanted a Monkey Man cake for his birthday and an outfit, and he had been very precise about how it should all look. I asked Donovan once again, who is Monkey Man? Why don't you draw me a picture again? He drew me a picture of Monkey Man, and I asked him, where does he live? I do not know. I only saw him once, said Donovan. He took our chicken. What? I asked. Why did you not tell me? You do not ask me. You didn't ask me, chuckled Donovan. Is he going to give us our chicken back, Mummy? He asked. No, I don't think so, I said. If you do see him again, you must tell Mummy, all right, and you must promise me you will not go up to him. Donovan nodded. He was a good boy, really. I have to say I'm still surprised I saw a Bigfoot that day, but he must have been a youngster. However, I will say this on reflection, what I saw that day, that Bigfoot looked exactly like the Patterson film, only he was much smaller and thinner. So that's my story. Bigfoot showed up for a birthday party when he's supposed to be elusive, but to be fair, I was the only one that noticed him that day. I did not get the impression he was dangerous, but I guess just like human beings, you are going to get different personality types. Even so, I would not be comfortable having him hang around our property. There have been a few whooping sounds on our property from time to time, and the occasional wood knocks among the other sounds that we hear at night. I do wonder if they're coming from our Bigfoot. As long as he keeps a distance, I really don't mind. Love to you and your viewers. Thank you so much for that wonderful story. Dear Sarah, it is with great trepidation I am writing you this letter, because my Bigfoot encounter happened as a result of my alcohol addiction. Yes, I've said it. I'm an alcoholic, but fortunately I've been sober for 8 years now. My alcoholic addiction was so bad, and I tried to hide it from my husband and family with very little success. My husband was finding my secret stash of alcohol in various places around the home, and he would literally pour everything I drank down the sink, much to my horror. Believe me, when you're an alcoholic and you see your drink going down the drain, there is nothing that is more devastating. Drinking for me was escapism. It helped numb my pain and not think about my life anymore. I had been abused as a child by my father, and somehow drinking helped me to forget about those tortuous times and I know that's no excuse. I mean, I was married to an amazing and loving husband, and I had 2 amazing children, but I just could not keep myself together. It was like the past kept coming back to haunt me, and every day, try as I might, I could not get those tormenting memories of my father's sexual abuse out of my head. Sometimes I would feel rage and anger towards my dad, and other times I would just break down emotionally, and I would weep and weep and weep. I guess I should have seen a counsellor, but I never really believed that that sort of stuff would ever work for me. There were times I was so drunk I forgot to pick up my children from school, and times when my kids would find me passed out on the living room sofa. I was so guilty in every way. I failed to shop for them at times so that the cupboards would sometimes be bare when my kids came home from school and were ravenously hungry, and they would be forced to get takeout. I was a rotten mother and a dreadful wife, both to my kids and my husband, and they both deserved better. One day after my husband had thrown all my alcohol away, I was so furious, and I knew that I had to find a much better hiding place for my alcoholic stash. "You really must stop drinking," he would say. "This stuff is going to kill you, and it'll destroy our family. The kids need their mum, and I need my wife." I knew he was right, but all that I could ever think about was another drink, and nothing else in this world mattered to me. That is how powerful the stronghold of drink had become in my life. I would lie that I wouldn't drink again, but thinking about a new hiding place for my alcohol was all that I had on my mind. Then I had a brilliant idea. I would go to the creek in the forest behind our home and put my stash in the water under the rocky ledge there that I had so often kept cool drinks cool in the past when we had gone to the creek for picnics. My vodka would keep nice and cold there, and it seemed like an amazing idea. So that's what I did. I brought a whole stash of alcohol and parked it in the shallow part of the water under the rocky ledge in the forest. So every day I would go there, and I would spend a long time there, getting drunk, passing out, and then returning home, assuring everyone that I hadn't had a drink. "Just search if you like," I would go on. "How can I drink if there's no drink in the house to drink?" One day my children had gone to school and my husband was safely at work, and I made my way to the forest. I was simply dying for a drink, and I couldn't get there fast enough. As I approached the creek, I saw 2 creatures on the grassy ledge, and they were monstrous. In fact, enormous isn't even the word to describe them. They were huge, and they were also staggering and falling all over the place in a way a person does when they are seriously drunk. For a moment I thought I was looking at 2 grizzly bears because they had the same colour hair and they were both big in girth and width. But no, they weren't bears, they were something else. But what? It suddenly dawned on me. I was looking at 2 Bigfoots, and they could not be anything else. One of the creatures got on the ground and started rolling around in the mud, and the other joined him, and they seemed to be chattering in excitement. It seemed like they were enjoying themselves, and then I knew why. There, scattered all over the place, were dozens of empty bottles of vodka. I could see the Bigfoots were completely drunk, and they were amusing to watch, because it was like they were spaced out, almost in another planet. They continue making these happy, chatting sounds together, and then after about 10 minutes or so, they became sleepy. And then they passed out and were snoring loudly on the grassy ledge. I will never forget those monstrous snores. They were like nothing I've ever heard before. I knew I needed to get out of the forest fast while they were asleep, because I would not have wanted to be around them sober. I was in no doubt that these normally elusive creatures could potentially be very dangerous. When I got home, I could not wait to tell my kids and husband what I had seen, but they all thought it was one of my drunk hallucinations and never believed me. But I know what I saw, and it was Bigfoot times 2. I finally did get counselling for my addiction, I'm glad to admit, but even sober, I've never imagined to convince my family that I saw two Bigfoot that day, and they were both incredibly drunk. Very interesting story. Thank you so much. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my father has been deceased for over 20 years now, but he told me a story once that completely blew my mind. I have to tell you, I do not have any details, such as date, years, or exact locations where this Bigfoot encounter happened, but I know this story really does need to be told, because believe me, it is quite some story. My only wish is that I can tell this story half as well as my father did. One day when I was about 18 years old, my father and I were sitting around the campfire at a camping location somewhere in Oregon, and we were all telling amazing ghost stories to entertain each other while we roasted marshmallows over the open flames of the fire. I remember my father was very quiet. He had a look of deep contemplation on his face, which I found out later was because he was wondering if he should tell his story at all. I have a true story to tell you, he told us. It really happened to me many years ago when I was a young man. It's a ghost story, I asked him excitedly. Did you see a ghost or something? Oh, please do tell us, Dad. No, not a ghost story, said my father, stroking his beard. Something more on the unusual side, he said. You could say it was a weird but very true experience. Go on, urged my mother. Have you ever told me? She asked him. No, never, said my father gravely. No, I've never told anyone, because the story is so weird, it's almost unbelievable. Go on, Dad, we encouraged. Please tell us your story. We were excited to hear what he was going to tell us. Well, when I was a young boy, living in Alaska, he said, I had a very big hobby. Every year I would go and watch the salmon run. It was something that was so spectacular to me. I was always mesmerized by those grizzly bears, and I just love watching them play in the water and eating the salmon. The problem with grizzlies, my father told us, they are very dangerous and formidable, with an incredible sense of smell, 17 times stronger than even a dog. The problem with their great sense of smell, my father continued, is that they can smell humans extremely easily, and they do not like us one bit. You see, at the best of times, they're elusive, secretive, and mysterious, and they are private animals, even avoiding other grizzly bears as much as possible. I wanted to watch the salmon run without being detected by those grizzly bears, he told us, so I hatched what I considered to be a spectacular plan. I decided not to bath for several weeks, without using any soaps or shampoos, and yes, I did smell disgusting. He laughed. I also ate a diet that was very bear-like. You could say I ate salmon for a whole month, I ate salad, honey and berries, and I drank pure spring water. I also covered my entire body every night with ash from the fireside, because they say that that will mop up any human-like odor. And I slept in a blanket that had been used on a young grizzly bear, and believe me, that blanket did smell of bear perfume, he laughed. I was hoping that all these strange techniques would help me mask my own human smell, so that I could sneak up on the salmon run without being detected. At least that was the plan. You see, he said, I really wanted to watch those bears and also sketch them so that later I could paint some beautiful pictures of them. My father was a brilliant artist, and he had painted some pictures of bears over many years, which were phenomenal. Did it work? I asked him. Oh yes, said my father. I did manage to watch several salmon runs with those bears, and I was not detected. They were oblivious to my presence. Year after year, he told us that he had engaged in the same strict protocol of eliminating all human odor and eating only what bears ate, so that he could watch the bears on the salmon run. I would always find a remarkable hiding place, he said, and I would watch the bears. I would say that those experiences are among the most wonderful in my entire life. Watching those bears interact with each other was spectacular, entertaining, and utterly mesmerizing. One day, he said, I was watching the bears on the salmon run. There were two very large grizzly bears that were gorging themselves on salmon. One of the bears was particularly huge, and he was hugely dominant and made sure the other bears knew their place. If the other bear got a bigger salmon than he did, he would confiscate it from that other bear and eat it for himself. The truth was that there was just tons and tons of salmon to choose from. They were everywhere, so I don't even know why the big bear bothered so much. It truly was an all-you-can-eat buffet for bears, and they loved every moment of it. Anyway, while this was all going on, I suddenly noticed those two grizzly bears became extremely agitated. Something was clearly bothering them, and it was bothering them a lot. Their noses sniffed the air, and they seemed really concerned by what they were smelling. You could tell they were not happy, not one little bit. I wondered suddenly if they had got a whiff of me. Perhaps they had finally detected my human smell, which until now I had managed to mask superbly, even if I say so myself. I was concerned, even though I was armed, because I love grizzly bears. The thought of having to kill one of those animals in a confrontation of some kind really concerned me. However, I would have to protect myself if the worst did come to the worst. I knew that I was no match for a grizzly weighing half a ton. Suddenly the two grizzly bears, who'd been barely tolerating each other, literally took off together as quickly as possible, and they ran together side by side as if they were firm friends, which they most certainly were not. Their behavior was exceedingly odd, I thought. Bears do not have any predators, none that I knew of. What could it be that would scare them off so much that they would react in such a terrified way? It was odd, because the bears had certainly not had their fill of salmon yet, and yet something had rattled their cages, but what? I was puzzled. I must have remained hidden in my hiding place for at least 20 minutes. There were no bears in sight, and the two bears had bolted off a while ago, had not returned. It was all very, very strange to me, but I decided to continue watching and waiting to see what would happen. For me, nature was extremely exciting, and I wanted to see if I could get a whiff at what had scared such magnificent creatures off. It was not long before the most horrible odour wafted past my nose. Truly, the scent was utterly disgusting, but honestly, I do not know how to explain that smell, so I won't even try, although I will say it was a little like dirty mop, stale urine and dead animal blended together into a nasty smell. It was then that I heard a strange, guttural, grunting noise, and then I saw this huge, monster-like creature. He was very big, like a bear, but he was not a bear. He was definitely bipedal, standing on two strong, muscular legs. He was covered all over with dark brown hair, much darker than a grizzly bear's. The hair looked thick and matted, as if he had overslept and woken up looking extremely bedraggled. "Yes," my father said. "That is a good word," he said. He truly looked bedraggled. He was not a pretty fellow. He had human-like essence to him, but he wasn't human. The closest animal that would resemble him, my father said, would be the ape. He had that ape-like look to him, you know what I mean? He had a huge dome-like head, virtually no neck to speak of, and the most massive shoulders that I have ever seen. His chest was about 4.5 feet across, and he must have weighed 900 pounds at the very least. He stood in the water and screamed the most horrible scream you have ever heard. It sounded like a woman was being murdered. That was the noise that was coming out of his throat, and it was terrifying. And it tormented me. I'm not quite sure how any animal in the woods would not have been affected by that noise. It was terrifying. The sound was so frightening that I could hear my heart pounding in my chest, and I just knew that I wanted to run as fast as I could. But the fear of seeing that animal made me stay grounded to my hiding spot. The creature did a strange thing. He stood in the water and screamed again, and then he thumped his chest in a very dominant way. He with his 2 fists. Then he proceeded to just devour the salmon, and he ate and ate almost as much as the bears would eat, and possibly even more. He then literally jumped over the bank area, which was over about 6 foot high, as if it was nothing, and disappeared into the woodline. "What do you think you saw?" I asked. "I have no clue," said my father. "I'm still wondering all these years later what on earth that thing was. But I promise you it scared me to the depths of my being. If something could scare a grizzly off like that, then that really is saying something," he said. It was only more recently, after thinking about that, my father talking around the fire and describing the creature, that I realized all these years later that my father must have seen a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch or the hairy man. In those days, no one knew what a Sasquatch was. Oh, I forgot to mention my father did tell me that the creature, or the Bigfoot, weed all over the place after he'd eaten his fill of salmon and then went up the bank. On reflection, I think he was marking his territory with the grizzly and saying, "This is my salmon run and not yours." So there you have it. It looks like the grizzly may have had an enemy after all. Who would have thought it? Bigfoot himself. I hope your listeners enjoyed my story. Please only use my first name. Many thanks, Isabella. Hello, welcome to the Saroy channel. I'm so glad you've joined me this evening. I've got a lovely, lovely story here about someone who built a beautiful, beautiful treehouse. And nowadays there are so many fabulous tree houses out there, and this was a really sensational one. And he got to see a Bigfoot in the hunt. And so I think it's quite an extraordinary story. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Love to each and everyone who's listening, and let's get started. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, it was in the fall of 1989 when I had my Bigfoot encounter in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I was 22 at the time and still lived with my parents, who lived in a small house on a few hundred acres of natural forest. As I was getting older, I wanted my own place quite naturally, but also to still live in close proximity to my parents. So I did ask my father if I could build a treehouse further in the forest that I could truly call my own. I had the perfect spot in mind, 3 very strong redwood trees of extensive size in a prime position that overlooked a pretty little creek and acres of lovely grassland, which would mean I would have great views of the natural wildlife. What was there not to like? I also wanted to make the access to the treehouse as discreet as possible, with tiny little steps built into the tree that were not too visible to the naked eye. In other words, I wanted to be living in a home 100 feet off the ground that hopefully nobody knew was there. That way I really would feel that it was my secret spot. My father was not keen about the treehouse idea, especially the part of the discreet access. You would need a proper staircase up and down the tree for your shopping and for anybody who comes to visit you, he said. My mother agreed with my dad, and I would have much preferred a sensible option she would have much preferred a sensible option of my having chosen a cabin or a cottage in the woods, near to theirs. The idea of a relatively inaccessible treehouse did not score many brownie points with her. "In a few years' time you'll regret it," she warned me. You're young, you're impractical, full of novel, contrary ideas that will be short-lived once you've got older and a little bit wiser. My father agreed, but finally, after much persuasion, that I could build a treehouse, and my best buddy so happened to be in the treehouse business that was starting to increase in popularity here in North America, and so I had the best man to help me with the job. Like my dad, Casey was not keen about my discreet steps idea to the tree, but he finally relented to my eager pleas and helped me design the perfect treehouse, and once it was finished, it had everything I could have ever dreamed of and so much more. It was the perfect man cave, with all the mod cons that I could ever desire. Even my parents thought the treehouse was a true work of art, and when you got to the top and gazed out of the large glass windows, you could see for miles around, and the views were utterly breathtaking. Every morning when I would wake up, I would make a steaming cup of hot coffee and just sit there with my binoculars and observe all the wildlife. I began to see birds that I'd never seen before, and animals that are sometimes so reclusive you never see them in nature. Like I saw a black panther once, and even a mountain lion. I loved the peace and serenity of my new life, and of course the independence it brought me. One morning when I looked out of the window, I saw a herd of deer dashing away from the creek. Something had clearly terrified them, and I wondered what it could be. I felt a sense of growing excitement stirring within me, like you get on a wildlife safari when you see the lion stalking its prey. That was the kind of feeling I had. A feeling of anticipation. I waited for a while and saw nothing, and just when I was about to give up my viewing and make another cup of coffee, my eyes suddenly caught a glimpse of movement coming from the dense-looking shrubbery that I knew was filled with thorn bushes. Surely nothing on God's earth could come through that, I thought. You'd have to have rhino skin to get through those needles. That would tear your skin to shreds, surely, I thought. Yet again I saw movement, and a black hazy blur came barging speedily through the thick undergrowth with brute force. What on earth is that, I wondered. Then I saw it. At first I really did not know what I was looking at, because the thing, whatever it was, looked like a massive blob of black dreadlocks. What the heck is that, I wondered, as the creature stood up on two thick legs that supported a huge, massive torso, shoulders and chest. I noticed that the arms were way too long to be human, and the creature possessed hands and definitely not paws. I immediately put on my scope to get a better view of this strange creature, the likes of which I have never seen before. I focused my scope on the creature and could see that I could see a conish head sitting directly on its shoulders, bypassing any obvious need for a neck. The face was human-like, but it wasn't human, and ape-like, but it wasn't ape. It was as if this creature was a blend of the great ape and human DNA. Then it hit me like a tornado of otherworldly revelation. No, surely not, I argued with myself. No, it can't be. It's impossible. Memories came flooding back of a boy I knew at school once, whom I'd made fun of because he told me he had seen a Bigfoot, and I had mocked him incessantly and teased him for his whimsical naivety. Now I was the one with egg all over my face. The creature in my lens was in no uncertain terms a Bigfoot. It could not have been anything else, and it was as if the creature had stepped out of cryptozoology myths and legends into a blatant, clear and vivid reality. Bigfoot was real. I suddenly felt ashamed for the know-it-all mentality I had adopted throughout my school years. Now I began to realize that I probably didn't know much at all about anything. I watched the creature as he moved with such fluidity. As he walked, every stride he took was huge, at least about 5 feet of ours to one of his strides. It really was like watching a top predator moving with incredible grace. I marveled that something this gargantuan could move like this. It was truly mesmerizing to watch. Then suddenly, like a jet plane about to take off, this creature leapt out of my view with an incredible speed, as if he'd revved up his engine and was gaining more momentum on the ground and was about to take off. I could not see the creature anymore, but I knew that he was in a hunt mode and was probably chasing that herd of deer I had seen moments earlier. It seemed like seconds had passed, and the Bigfoot suddenly came back into view, and I suddenly realized he wasn't chasing deer anymore, but was after some wild hog that I know from experience can be exceedingly aggressive. This was a wild goose chase if ever I saw one, and one that was certainly enjoyable. I thought he must have stumbled across hog along the path as he was about to hunt, and he was changing tactic. Like a lion, he pounced on the creature, holding him down with his massive great girth that clearly must have been crushing that hog. I knew the hog must have been screaming, and I was so glad not to be near enough to hear it because I hate that sound. The Bigfoot, using one arm, then tossed this 400-pound hog in the air as if it was a pizza, and allowed it to land on the ground with an almighty crash. I knew that the hog was dead as it lay limp on the ground, and he straddled it over his large shoulders. The Bigfoot walked away into the undergrowth, leaving the way he had just come. It took me a long while to adjust to what I had seen. In fact, for such a long time, I just stood there, just saying nothing. I knew I had to make amends with that school friend of mine that I had relentlessly teased at school for believing in this cryptid creature. So I decided I would phone him, and that's what I did. "Hello," came the voice at the other end of the line. "Bruce speaking. Hey buddy, it's Dwayne from high school, remember?" "Yeah," he said. "I remember you." I'm phoning to apologize, buddy." "About what?" came the surprised voice. "Remember how I teased you at school about believing in Bigfoot?" "Oh yeah, that?" "Well, you're right. He's real." "You've seen him?" I proceeded to tell him what had transpired in the last few minutes, and I could tell by Bruce's animated response that he was still as passionate about Bigfoot as he'd always been. And the biggest irony of all was that he was studying to be a cryptid zoologist of all things. "Do you mind if I come over to your place?" he said eagerly. "I'd like to see where it all happened and take a look to see if there's any evidence." "Of course," I said. "Be my guest." "I'm sure you know a lot more than I do, buddy," I said. I must say I am still in awe of what I've just seen and more curious than ever. "That's what happens to a lot of people," said Bruce. "Once they've seen a Bigfoot, it changes everything, and people just become passionate about the creature." "What do you think that it is?" I asked. "Well, I think people love mystery, for starters," he said. "I know I do. And then there is the humanness to the creature. That's fascinating. I think people relate to that humanness." After a long conversation with Bruce, he arrived at my property within the hour, and I could see by the flushed look on his face that he was very excited to retrace the Bigfoot movements that I had seen earlier. We wasted no time in examining the area with the fine tooth comb, and we found the bloody spot where the hog had been flung to the ground. There was blood everywhere. We noticed the ground was too dry and hard for any footprints of the creature, and so that was disappointing. Yet we could detect the rank odour, or the afterglow, so to speak, that hung in the air that is so often associated with a Bigfoot encounter. We walked deeper into the woods, and Bruce told me to listen. "I can't hear anything," I said. "That's my point. It's usually quiet when Bigfoot is around," said Bruce. "All the animals go quiet. Even the birds stop chirping." As we walked into the woods, I had the distinct feeling we were being watched, and I knew that Bruce was feeling it too. It was like a gnawing gut feeling that is so unsettling it brings on feelings of extreme nausea. I just knew I needed to leave, and that's what we did. We ended up having coffee in my treehouse, and Bruce told me that my treehouse was the most perfect hideaway spot for spotting Bigfoot. All these years later, I still live in my treehouse with my wife, but we have made some adjustments, like putting up a real great staircase that winds its way up the tree and makes it much easier for access. I have to admit, my dad was right there. I did see the Bigfoot creature one more time, but it was so brief. But I keep on watching, I keep on waiting, and I keep on hoping for another encounter with Bigfoot. And well, Bruce, the guy I teased mercilessly at high school, he's now my best friend. Isn't life ironic? And as far as our fascination for the elusive man goes, well, our fascination for the hairy man has most definitely increased. I hope you guys enjoyed my story. That was a fantastic story. Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.